Hey, hello everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Rodney Sobin. I'm a Senior Program Director at NASEO. I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar on Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings, our new initiative and our new collaboration, particularly with NARUC, which I'll talk a bit more about in a few moments. We're pleased to have with us David Nemsow of the Building Technologies Office at Department of Energy, who will give a Department of Energy perspective and overview on grid interactive efficient buildings. That'll be followed by me focusing in on our project and our initiative. I'll be joined by Rachel Gold of ACEEE, who will be discussing one of the components of the project, focused on utility GEB, or Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings Working Group, and Danielle Sass-Burnett of NARUC, who has been collaborating with us on a number of projects, and we're very pleased to work with her on this and another complementary effort, which she'll talk about later. And if I can get the technology to work, I will advance that with a little bit of logistics. All attendees are in mute mode right now, or silence mode. We will use the GoToWebinar question box on the right, probably lower right or somewhere on the right of your panel, rather than raising of hands. So please enter questions using that box. We will delay the Q&A unless there's something really burning until after the presentations are done. We will be recording this. The recording and the slides will be posted via the NASEO website. There is an events tab, and under that there is a past webinar tab. So that will be the logistics. I will gladly hand off the presentation to David Nemsow, Director of the Building Technologies Office. David, I don't know if you want to give like a 5-second bio of yourself first, or if you just want to launch into your presentation.
I'll do that. So greetings, thanks Rod and NASEO and Danielle and NARUC and the others for organizing this webinar on buildings to grid and grid interactive efficient buildings. I do direct the Building Technologies Office, which I'll tell you about in a moment, and I've been in the field of energy efficiency and utility and grid modernization my entire career, and believe strongly that we need to look at the intersection of traditional efficiency with the grid. Since I run the Buildings Office, we're going to talk today about buildings, but of course there's an important simultaneous set of activities going on with vehicles and other end uses that are grid interactive. So if we could steam ahead, first a word from our sponsors. BTO, as I said, is part of EERE in the Department of Energy. We are not furloughed, thank you. We are funded, and this year our budget is $226 million, of which much of it goes for research and development and other activities having to do with codes and standards and integrating new technologies into the residential commercial marketplace. Next slide. So we work on that spectrum of market transformation. I suspect many of you know this, but it's important. When we do our R&D, we always want to keep an eye out on how to get it into the marketplace, how to get it accepted by consumers, how to give them those tools to integrate new technologies into their decision-making so they can make informed decisions. And then, of course, as they become business as usual and fully tested, how to help build them into the model building energy codes that you all at the state level and your colleagues in local government adopt and enforce, and then appliance efficiency standards, which come from the federal government. So that's the BTO approach. Next. So just by background, buildings are bigger than industry, bigger than transportation, 40% of the U.S. energy use, and more relevant and similar, about 39 or 40% of U.S. CO2 emissions. For today's conversation, more relevant are the next pair of numbers if you look at the bottom, and that is that buildings consume about 75% of U.S. electricity, and depending on the region you're in, at peak, that's typically 80% or more of peak demand come from the building side. That leads to a total energy bill for buildings annually of $380 billion, and much of which is wasted, much of which is inefficient, and we can do better at. And we're going to talk today, of course, focusing more on the peak side and how we manage energy. If you just look up at those two pie graphs, you can see the same things that I talked about, and you can see those end uses. We won't talk about it today, but on those end uses, if you look at the pie chart on the top right, that big light gray lurking slice is other. This is a variety of not just plug loads, but plug loads as well as other miscellaneous use. Just about all those other slices, well, just about all those other areas are going down in terms of their absolute energy consumption in this country, thanks to energy efficiency and other progress, HVAC, lighting, white goods. The miscellaneous one and the other and plug load one is going up on an absolute basis and even up more quickly on a percentage basis. So that's something to keep in mind, not for today, but of course, going forward. Why don't we keep going? Look, this is why we're on this call, right? This is as basic as it gets. The old model on the left of a one-way power flow where this energy, the utility grid would, as they say, predict and provide power to this modern world that we're already well into, of two-way power flows, of distributed generation, and what I want to talk about today, distributed consumption and managing consumption in a more dynamic way. So you see cars in that graphic, you see buildings, you see factories. We're going to focus on those in this modern two-way interactive power grid. Next, please. So when we talk about grid interactive efficient buildings at DOE, and we've talked to this, I think many of you, I spoke, NASEO was good enough to have me at the annual meeting in Detroit this year, and I spoke about these issues, and I think many of you, I'm sure, were in the room or in the panel, the concurrent afterwards, and then NARUC had me speak at the Orlando at their winter meeting, and we covered these. In that case, at NARUC, it was part of a panel that Danielle and others set up that was broader, looking at the role of renewables too, not just efficiency and demand management. But the reason we're trying to get building loads to be more flexible or multiple, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but we want buildings not just to be static energy consumers. We don't want them just to be passive consumers of electrons, but to be dynamic, flexible, controllable, maybe even dispatchable, so that they can help manage grid resources, help make the grid more reliable and resilient, help manage peak load, help deal with the integration of resources, primarily distributed renewables, resources that aren't schedulable. And in the extreme example, we know in Arizona and Southern California is the duck curve, but it happens in other places too to varying degrees. So we need to think about how we use demand and load from buildings as well as from others that consume power to help contribute to solving these problems by being more flexible and dynamic. And of course, doing that, not just to be an engineer and enjoy optimizing things, but because it should lead, if we do it right, to a lower cost solution, that we should have a lower cost answer measuring all costs, capital cost, operating costs, environmental and productivity costs, a lower total cost by looking at all our multiple resources. So at the end of the day, I hope, and what we're working on at DOE, is that buildings will be a distributed energy resource, and their flexibility will contribute to the same goals that you pick it, distributed PV or lithium-ion batteries or vehicles or natural gas peakers do to make the grid nimble. When we keep going. So this may be what you're doing right now, sitting in a building there. You're the occupant. And when we deal with buildings as in anything demand side, we need to keep in mind the building isn't there to be part of somebody's grid solution, even though I might like that. The building is there to provide comfort and productivity and to let people run their business, sell their product, raise their family, whatever it might be. So the occupant has to come first, and we have to be able to deliver those services. Okay, that's basic. What we can now do in a way, increasingly over the years with new technology, is to be able to control those services much more dynamically. And in this schema, right, so you have lighting controls. Those are very familiar, but they're more than just occupancy sensors that everybody has by now. With LED lighting and connected lighting and advanced sensors that can be placed in more places, we can control lighting in a much more subtle and sophisticated way for all sorts of purposes. We can control the spectrum. We can turn it off. We can understand the population of a room, not just whether it is occupancy or not. Similarly, with outdoor conditions, that you might not be able to tell is a dynamic facade, so that we can automate it and harvest daylighting whenever possible and save on power consumption, or do other things. So a window doesn't have to be passive anymore; it can be active. And I think where there's enormous potential is on the HVAC side. Of course, we can control temperatures and turn things on and off and pre-cool, but increasingly, thanks to distributed thermal storage and to, again, sensors that can detect population, we can control HVAC in a much more subtle and sophisticated way. If we know the population of a large room, we can have demand control ventilation so that we get all the air circulation we need, but no more than we want to pay for on the energy bill. That can all happen now. That's a smart building that's sort of described in that schema. Where we want to get to is the next level. If you look at that utility signal, we want a smart and grid interactive building. So the building is not only smart because its occupants, or more likely a building manager, gave data to a thermostat or to algorithms that did that, but because the utility is also sending signals that it's peak and electricity is expensive, or it's just congested and highly polluting, and it's a good time to level off if end users want to, or again, alternatively, if there's a duck curve, now is a good time to consume electrons because we've got a lot of them that are clean and cheap, and if you can use them now, do it. So that's the vision for grid interactive, efficient buildings, the world we want to get to. And again, those schema, those diagrams on the lower right are just all the appliances. That's a water heater, that's a furnace, that's a clothes washer, and that's a fridge. And they all have these capabilities, of course. Electric hot water heaters, that's an electric hot water heater, of course, because we're talking about electricity today, are a great de facto thermal energy storage device. Next, please. I think I covered this. I'll let you read it for yourself for a moment. Smart, talk to some people use smart and connected to mean the same thing. I'm trying to distinguish here between smart, meaning the microprocessing and the algorithms, connected, meaning connected, in this case, connected to the internet or to communication, not just connected to the grid. Flexible, I talk about. I just want to go back to efficient. One thing that's essential to us at DOE, and I suspect to many, if not all of you in the States and others on this call, is that we want to make sure that these new capabilities promote energy efficiency. We don't want all this smartness and all this capability and all this connectedness to be just used for other services, valuable essential services such as security, such as comfort, etc. But we don't want them all this capability to go in that direction. We also want to see that we can increase energy efficiency at the end use of the building and the equipment, and of course, energy efficiency of the grid as a whole by making it shaping that load curve to be efficient on a grid-wise basis. So we don't want to lose track of the efficient. And look, a lot of the smart stuff, it was just Christmas a couple of weeks ago. A lot of the smart stuff is just fun. And that's great. That's important in life. But again, we want to have all those other things: fun, safety, security, mobility, and efficiency. So I want to underscore that. Next, please. I'll be quick. I'm almost out of time. Key element of this, and anybody who is involved in utility issues knows this inside out, is just as the supply curve in the course of the day, in the course of the year, the 8760 supply curve of electric power for any utility system or grid or region, whatever, however you want to do it, varies over that 8760. And for the great majority of the country, that's still summer peaking. Those sweaty August afternoons are when a peak is the highest because of residential and commercial air conditioning, and it's the most expensive to deliver those kWh. Not just the total bill, of course, but the marginal kWh, because you're using in all likelihood, your highest heat rate, least efficient power plant. You have all those T&D losses from the congestion, et cetera, et cetera. And it's probably also the highest emitting part of the day, as well as the least reliable. And so that means if producing power at certain times is much more expensive, that means saving power at that time is much more valuable. So this is quantitative analysis that was done by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for BTO that try to disaggregate that. We picked Massachusetts for this graphic. You can pick, again, any part of the country that's summer peaking, which is most of the country, and you can see, right, saving 1 kilowatt hour or 1 megawatt hour of air conditioning is a lot more valuable to society than saving the same in an exit sign or some of the others. So that's, again, why we care about this flexibility. We're trying to shift consumption from the most expensive, most resource-consuming times to other times. And this quantitative analysis, time-sensitive valuation, helps give us a rigorous quantitative way to do that, to appreciate how enormous the delta is between, again, that sweaty August afternoon versus that mild April afternoon. Next, please. Slides I stole from PG&E. I shouldn't say that, since PG&E is looking for all the money they can get these days. So I didn't steal it. I borrowed it. These are 2 buildings. These graphs below are they're not graphs for those particular buildings. I don't even know what buildings they are. They're just representational. On the left, let's just, in the interest of time, skip the solar part for now. If you look at that yellow demand curve on the left of a building, either of these buildings, right, typical 24-hour peaking in the afternoon. Obviously, with solar, the net demand will look different to the utility than it does to the building. But if you look to the right, if we can first, as always, go first with energy efficiency, in this case in the afternoon, the technology we picked for this, and also use demand response to really focus on some of those peak times, we can change the shape of that load curve and make it something that does 2 things that are valuable to society. One is to lower the curve, particularly at peak, but just to lower the curve. That's sort of what energy efficiency does, right? It lowers the space under the curve, the number of kilowatt hours, but also flatten the shape of it and lower the peak of it to make it that expensive peak less consuming. Now that PG&E put in the solar into this picture, it also means that a building that does this could get by with less PV if they choose to. They may not. If they have good net metering, they might want that and sell it into the grid. But if they can shift their own load, then they need less traditional resources, but also they can save across the supply side. Next, please. Reminder, this is a building. It is not your science experiment or your energy solution exclusively. So Marriott, from Marriott's point of view, they believe in smart and connected buildings. But for them, remember, and if you look at this schema from them, many of these things are energy related, right? HVAC and lighting and thermostats, but many of them aren't. It's the same interconnected communication kinds of technologies to do keyless entry or to worry about security or fire. And so from their point of view, they're looking at smartness more broadly and connectedness more broadly. So that, I would submit, provides an opportunity for all of us at the state and federal and other levels that care about energy efficiency. It provides opportunities. Marriott and many other companies invest in technologies, and it provides a challenge as we compete with other end uses with other desirable states, such as fire and security, that will always be important to those buildings. And if you saw Doug Rath's next slide, he would show you which of these things don't work on any given day. Maybe that's what those red things are. Sometimes they go out. We know that the more sophisticated a system is, there are some risks. There's cyber risks and there's failure risks. But it provides this enormous potential for buildings to be a very significant resource. Next, please. This is just, I'll keep going. This is just the bucket of how BTO divides up our work into 4 buckets that we work with many of you on. We're working with NARUC and NASEO, NACEE. We're working with the national labs, and we're working with individual states. But the 4 are: how do you, going clockwise, how does one value grid interactive efficient buildings? How do we do that quantitative analysis so we know what we're getting? How big is the resource, right? Everybody I talk to about this issue agrees that buildings can be a grid resource. It starts getting interesting when we talk about how big a resource can it be and how cost effective can it be. So that valuation work is trying to do that. Next are developing new technologies or advancing technologies to give us more options to do more interactivity more cheaply, more effectively, without any reduction in comfort. Validation. This stuff doesn't always work in real life like it does in the lab. And finally, how do you optimize across these multiple new choices we have? Storage, PV, fuel cells, cars, gas, whatever it may be. How do we optimize? So that's our work. Happy to talk to anybody about that at any time. Next, please. This is you guys. This is what we think. This is very simplistic of why we think state energy offices and state PUCs, as well as other state players, code officials, air regulators, the whole commerce and economic development departments. Why should you care? So again, it's the linkage between traditional energy efficiency in buildings and the modern grid and the modernizing grid, and as well as your energy goals, your energy efficiency or peak goals you may or may not have, your emission goals. Just yesterday in today's news clips, Colorado's new Governor Polis, talking about carbon in his inaugural speech, and other states. They're going to look at all these issues: clean energy and grid mod. We think this should be an important part of it and can be. I want to work with you too, of course, making that the grid this more reliable in the first place, and more resilient and more flexible. And then, of course, regular human beings who need to have more affordable energy, more competitive businesses, and choice is always good. Next, please. So that's who we are. These are 2 of my closest colleagues, but a lot of us at the Buildings Office and DOE are working on this issue. And I just want to say in conclusion that, because I know it's important to all of you who work for government, we have support for this among all corners, meaning the career staff appreciates the importance of this, the national lab researchers do, and the political leadership of the department think this is a priority. And so that's a nice alignment of resources, and does the Hill. And we keep getting more financial resources. So it's going to stay on our A+ list, and we'd like to work with you. We totally appreciate many of these decisions will certainly not be made by us. They'll be made by you, either in your programs or your policies that you or your governor does, or in the case of PUC staff, you may either encourage or push your utilities in a direction or other, or they may submit a filing, and you'll say, oh, what do we do with this thing? So that's where we're at. Thanks again, Rod.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks for that great overview. And I think it was your conclusion there was perfect, because our project that I'm about to talk about is designed to work with you to provide resources to the states and input from the states that may help you at DOE develop your R&D portfolio and other activities, as well as your colleagues in the laboratories. So we're very pleased for this collaboration, and I should also acknowledge, as you said, a word from our sponsor. We're very grateful for the financial support of the Building Technologies Office of DOE. So I'm going to talk about this new Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings initiative at NASEO, and also to focus on our collaboration with NARUC on this, as well as other players. You'll hear from ACEEE as well this afternoon. I'm going to provide a bit of the context. Some of that's going to be a little bit redundant with what David had mentioned, but I'll try to be quick about that. The purpose and benefits of both Grid Interactive Buildings, but also this project and this initiative. And then I'll spend most of the time, or a significant amount of the time, on the activities under this new initiative, this project, particularly a NASEO NARUC GEB State Working Group, as well as the resources that we will be developing and offering through this project, and I hope beyond this project. I also would like to cover a little bit of a couple of complementary activities. There is a parallel utility GEB working group being developed by our friends at ACEEE. And as I had mentioned before, we are collaborating with NARUC, and we have Danielle Sass-Burnett to talk about a comprehensive electricity planning task force that is underway. And then we'll conclude with a little bit about expected next steps, and also provide a few listings of resources as well. So as David mentioned, the changing technology is quite breathtaking, actually. And the new technologies are allowing more impactful and flexible load management. This allows reduction of peak load demand, both through efficiency as well as load management. If we can make buildings more flexible and even dispatchable, they become sort of virtual power plants and virtual energy storage potentially. And this helps with improving integration of variable resources, variable generation, whether on the grid side, thinking about the solar and wind resources, as well as distributed resources, whether they be fossil or renewable in form, as well as the other distributed energy resources. I put in a little bullet for transactive energy, the idea that these technologies can facilitate or enable business and economic signals that go back and forth to allow transactions, whether it's short-term ancillary services or it's longer-term and broader load management for shifting and reducing peaks. As David had also mentioned, energy efficiency and improving that, enhancing it, growing that is central, I think, to all of these things. And then behind that, environmental performance, much of that emissions, but could include water and waste as well. But certainly emissions both of the criteria regulated air pollutants and in many states, growing number of states, greenhouse gas concerns. And so there are also resilience benefits that we think will accrue to grid interactive efficient buildings. And by resilience, both speaking on the grid side as well as individual buildings and facilities. In terms of the grid, more flexible load management in buildings and having buildings as these virtual storage and supply can reduce stresses to the grid on high electricity demand days or when something goes kerflooey somewhere else in the grid, as well as providing resilience benefits to individual buildings, facilities, campuses, communities, where there may be a microgrid or local distributed resources that can be relied on if there is something going bad elsewhere in the system. And then resource optimization and cost savings, using the resources in a more efficient and optimal way, again, both on the grid side as well as the building side, and thinking about facilitating non-wire solutions to distribution limits and some of those sorts of things, delaying T&D investments and such. So really the big questions here for this project and I think beyond is how can we optimize facility interactions with the grid? And I say facilities because it's individual buildings, but it could be a campus or an industrial facility. It could be street lamps. It could be other sorts of things as well. But our focus here is on buildings. And then how can states fashion policies, programs, and regulations to advance such optimization through grid interactive efficient buildings? What are policy and regulatory impediments? How can we overcome them? Of course, we need to identify them first before overcoming them. So we think that states would benefit greatly from increased exchange among the states with technical experts, with our friends and colleagues at DOE and others, to learn about the state of the technologies, their applications, potential scale and scope of their application. Also the ability to identify private and public sector expertise and resources, not only within the scope of this particular initiative to draw them in as stakeholders, but also for individual states to be aware of who to consult and who to utilize as they think about their own regulatory and policy environments. And then an opportunity for states to provide feedback and express their priorities and concerns and interests to share among the states, as well as to provide feedback to Department of Energy and others that might inform R&D decisions, RD&D decisions. And again, to identify opportunities and impediments. And by that, I'm talking about non-technical as well as technical. Again, what may be regulatory and policy issues that may need to be addressed or tweaked or changed to improve our opportunities. Very important is recognizing the temporal and locational value of energy efficiency and distributed resources. We think this activity will help states to better understand this. One of David's slides had a figure from Massachusetts. The little eye chart figure on the right for decorative purposes is similar. It expresses the thinking about energy efficiency and what the value of a given kilowatt hour of savings is when you time differentiate it versus when you don't. So better understanding and clarification of those things we think would be mutually beneficial among the states as well as for other stakeholders. We think this activity can help clarify some of the electric system requirements, both technical, data needs, interoperability, as well as regulatory and rate approaches. And so, we hope that this activity will help inform state planning, policy, regulations, and programs. So central to this activity will be development of a state working group, the NASEO State Working Group, which would include state energy officials, utility commissioners, DOE reps, and selected experts. The idea here is to inform states about the state of research, technology, and implementation, to identify individual states' contexts that can either promote or hinder grid interactive efficient buildings, and to identify the individual state context. Different states have different regulatory environments. They have different generation mixes, different peaking times sometimes, and to be able to better discuss and understand what's going on there. So also to identify information gaps and needs, and this can help again both on the technical and non-technical side. We anticipate that the state working group, we're looking for about 10 states or so, but we're relatively flexible. We'd like to focus on a smaller number of states to provide, the 10 or so, to provide more detailed interaction. but we do anticipate that the results of this and webinars and such will be available to states in general, because we do want lessons and products and resources that would be useful throughout the country. Central to this activity will be a number of engagement and exchange opportunities. We will have a series of engagement calls with the state working group, bringing in outside experts, as well as a series of webinars. Details are TBD. In some respects, it's also to solicit from you, the states, what are the concerns and interests. We also plan on a workshop in the fall, probably associated with the NASEO annual meeting, which will be in California. So the intention of this project will be to develop a number of resources to offer to the states. We will have briefing papers that will be oriented to state interests and state perspectives. I should mention that one of these will be focused on the residential context. We recognize that there are some aspects of residential grid interactive buildings and smart homes that have a bit different context and some different market and technical opportunities and constraints than when you think about office buildings or campuses or industrial facilities. So we will make a special effort to have a focus on residential as well as a focus on other sorts of building types. We will be developing sort of scoping for a model of road mapping. We will not be developing actual state roadmaps in this project as such, but we do want to help the states to identify what are the factors and what are the aspects that need to go into a roadmap should their state decide to go through a road mapping or similar action plan sort of exercise. We also will use this project and the state feedback to try to scope the potential for pilots. We will not be doing actual pilots under this, but we know that there are certain activities, pilot-like activities occurring across the nation. We want to learn about them, exchange information, and that can inform the development of additional pilots. They may be state-federal partnerships or through other means, utility pilots as well. I think Rachel may say a few words about that later. And we also would like to work through this project with individual states that are engaged in distribution planning, distribution system planning, to understand some of their experiences, to share lessons, and also to help identify relevant resources and expertise. So that is a lot of what we're planning on. That's sort of the whirlwind. There are some complementary activities to this. Under the aegis of this project, our colleagues at the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy are going to be developing a parallel utility GEB working group. And I do want to recognize Rachel Gold and ask her to say a few words about that task.
Great. Thanks, Rod. As Rod mentioned, I'm Rachel Gold with the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and we're really excited to be working with NASEO, NARUC, DOE, and others to put together a utility grid interactive efficient buildings working group. And the idea here is to be a complement to the work that's happening with state officials. As you all know very well, utilities are a really key actor in the system and pretty necessary to support the vision of grid interactive efficient buildings for a few reasons, both because they, in many places, are the grid operators or have a role, obviously, in grid operation, and as well in most states, they serve as program administrators for energy efficiency and demand response programs. They have grid modernization programs or processes going on, and so they're really one of the linchpins of making this vision work. And so we're putting together a working group that will be a peer network of utility staff from across organizations, so energy efficiency folks, demand response folks, grid modernization staff. And the idea is to create a space for these peer utilities to be able to talk about the questions that are coming up in this space, to think through challenges that are coming up, and in particular to identify the activities that they're doing that could foster or hinder grid interactive building integration, and also some of the regulatory or other types of market issues that might be helping or hindering that grid interactive efficient building integration. So it's an opportunity to bring utilities together to have a space for them to talk to each other about this. We've done this with low income and multifamily programs and are really excited to move into this space, which is a little bit more leading edge and one of the places where we can see energy efficiency play a lot of different roles and help to support a lot of different value streams for utilities and other actors. So we'll be kicking this off soon. It'll be structured primarily as a webinar series, but there will also be opportunities for technical assistance and research support by request for some of the participating utilities. And we're looking for a really diverse set of utilities. So diverse in terms of market structure, deregulated, regulated, fully vertically integrated, diverse in terms of geography. We want IOUs, public power, co-ops. And so we're hoping to build a really robust group that will be a complement to the work that you all are doing on the state side. And we're hoping to have a group of folks, some of whom are really already in the weeds of developing programs and delivering programs, as well as some of the utilities that are maybe not there yet, but are thinking about this in one or more of the areas of their company. So looking forward to working with you all and to seeing how we can create connections between the work that these utilities are doing and the state offices and commissions that regulate them. Thanks, Rod.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and we're very much looking forward to working with you and having these two components exchange and work in complement with each other. We think there's a lot of synergy there. I also want to mention NARUC NASEO Task Force on Comprehensive Electricity Planning, which is it got launched at NARUC's last meeting and is gearing up rather rapidly. And I will hand it to Danielle to give us the thumbnail sketch on that. Danielle?
Thanks, Rodney. Yes, this is Danielle Sasburnett with NARUC. We are thrilled to be partnering with NASEO on this effort. The intent here is to design a 2-year-long engagement with about a dozen or so states. We will bring both a commissioner and a state energy office director or other leader to the table to engage in a series of 4 progressive workshops beginning in April of this year, where we'll really be focused on how to break down and reimagine the series of steps and processes that go into distribution level planning, whether it's distributed energy resources planning, grid modernization, distribution system planning, et cetera, and resource planning, whether it's IRP or planning for meeting RPS or EERS goals in a wholesale market, et cetera. We are going to be guiding the participants through a strategic planning style process of identifying vision and benefits of a more optimal decision-making system, identify what the barriers are to achieving that, and then work through different opportunities for reimagining how this all works together. There will be opportunities for stakeholders to be engaged through invitation at 2 of the workshops, and then 2 of the workshops will be state participants only. As noted on the slide here, there's a letter of intent due for any states that want to join at the end of next week, a week from today, Friday, and then we intend to announce the state participants around the first week in February at the NASEO meeting. And then that first workshop will be in early April in Denver, Colorado. The folks who decide to participate will have access to DOE and National Lab support and other experts, and they will be engaging in a very collaborative process that should be a lot of fun and produce some really interesting tools and roadmaps. Each state who participates will develop some kind of an action plan, and this will also all be rolled up into a series of 4 or so different roadmaps that are relevant to lots of states. So for vertically integrated states who are or not in a wholesale market, et cetera, we're going to be grouping states together so that the results are broadly replicable. Anything else you'd like me to add to that, Rodney, or do you want to add?
No, I think that's great. We're of course very pleased to be working with you both on this the comprehensive electricity planning as well as the GEB project, and I think this is part of an ongoing dialogue and collaboration among both sets of state officials, the energy offices and the utility commissions, and I think it's mutually beneficial. And I think it's all good. So,
I'll just
go ahead.
For this task force, the previous slide, the task force, to participate in that, it does require having both a commissioner at a utility commission and a state energy office director, whereas participation in the grid interactive efficient buildings work that we were discussing today to this point does not have that level of paired participation. And so if you are from a state that is interested in engaging more in these issues and starting down the path of understanding more about the technology and the R&D and what's happening with buildings, the GEB working group is a great place for you, and that is open to commission staff, not just commissioners.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. So a couple of things coming up. Next item for the GEB group is, or GEB group. I think we need a better acronym, but that's something maybe the working group can come up with. So the in the NASEO Energy Policy Outlook Conference coming up in several weeks, we will have a pre-conference workshop or meeting to explore this a bit deeper. So we will have a session which will be open to participants in the conference, state and territory, and our affiliate members. And we anticipate having a further discussion with David, with Danielle, with us, as well as a number of states to provide some comments. And we hope one or more presentations to describe technical aspects, not seriously technical, but more of an overview, and also to make it a little more tangible, perhaps by discussing some projects that are underway or in prospect. So I hope many of you state folks will see you in February at the NASEO conference. And also we're very pleased in our collaboration with NARUC that at their conference, which is right after our conference, the Energy Resource and Environment Committee will be having a business meeting, and we will be having a discussion on this project with that group. So we anticipate a variety of activities. I will be asking that states express interest by February 21st to be part of our Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings working group. We're a little less formal than the other project that Danielle was talking about. So it's not, it's not a formality, but I would ask for an expression of interest primarily by an email to me. And those who are on the group, I would like to have some additional discussions to understand state interests, state concerns, any experience within your states. Over the course of the project, we will have a series of stakeholder engagement calls and webinars. The first will be in the first quarter of 2019 to be determined. We will also have quarterly state DOE industry calls and webinars, which will bring in experts to try to discuss a number of aspects. We anticipate that some of those will be oriented towards the residential applications, whereas others more commercial. To some extent, the actual topic will depend on working group members' views and what they're viewing as areas of interest and concern. And then in the fall of 2019, we will have a workshop, premature to say much about it, except it's most likely to be at the annual meeting of NASEO in California in September, and more to come as we get closer. I do want to end with the presentation portion with a list of a number of resources. We will, again, we will have this posted. The resources listed include several pertinent presentations from the NASEO annual meeting in Detroit. David had mentioned the one that he had given. Point out Jan Berman of PG&E, from whom David borrowed a slide. And I do want to mention Chris Baker at the White Group, who provided an alternative to the duck curve in California, apparently in the upper Midwest with the wind regime there. They have smiling gators. Who would have thought that would be seen in the upper Midwest? And then a real tangible example is Southern Company has a couple of projects. One that's actually underway is a smart neighborhood near Birmingham, Alabama, real fascinating, integrating solar storage, natural gas generation, grid interactive features in residences, cool stuff. So please, we welcome inquiries and questions. And speaking of questions, one that did come in earlier on was someone saying, recently when I visited a Hilton hotel in Amsterdam, the light and HVAC were controlled using the room key. That was new to me. Is this energy efficiency? So that's a good question. It could be energy efficiency if it's sort of like a occupancy sensor and the lights go off and the HVAC is toned down when the occupant is not there and it's not needed. I think interesting question is it's energy efficiency, but it's also demand management. And I don't know if David wants to maybe ask about that or say something about HVAC and lighting controls.
I'll say on the terminology, working on it here and being active in it to a degree internationally, it's a loser's game trying to figure out precise terminology here. So, or we could just talk about it indefinitely. But yeah, no, it is part of controls, and we want a world in which we have all these options, right? To turn things off when they're not in use, to turn them down when they're overused, to turn them on when they're needed and essential. So it's part of it. It's a very simple, affordable one, and one of many. Just in the U.S. alone, we have 124 million or so buildings. So there's lots of room for experiment and for multiple options.
Okay, great. Thank you. So another question that came in was a bit asking a bit more about how the project will engage external stakeholders, and some of that is and who those stakeholders may be. So we do anticipate beyond our friends at DOE and their colleagues at the national laboratories who have a great deal of expertise. We do intend to identify and bring in technology and service providers. We think there are some aggregation services. We've seen this a bit in the conventional demand response world, but with this more dynamic and controllable possibilities, there may be some other companies which are trying to play in that space as aggregators, and I would imagine they would have something to say about transactive energy and what policies and regulations allow and don't allow, and how those might be modified over time. I think that the ISOs and RTOs would be people that we will engage, as well as facility operators that would, since we're focused on buildings, that would be the places where the rubber meets the road. So those are the types. We will seek to bring in some of that expertise for our periodic conference calls and webinars. We will seek to engage them in doing some additional research as contributors to the briefing papers or working papers that we will develop. And we will also try to put together some sort of annotated bibliography or lists of resources that we would be very pleased to share with the states. I should mention that DOE, the Buildings Technology Office, has some other complementary activities that we will be keep abreast of. And there is something called the C Action Network, State and Local Energy Efficiency Action Network, that is jointly overseen by the Department of Energy and EPA. And there are some relevant efforts there that we will be sure to complement, but not replicate or step on each other's toes, but make sure that we work together.
Let me just add this, David, here real quick to that, all the above, and if you know of other stakeholders who aren't state officials, who you think would be relevant or helpful, if you could email myself and or Rod, we'll collect those names and we'll go find them. Thanks. Yeah,
thank you. Another question that came up is the relationship between the NASEO GEB working group and the NASEO Comprehensive Energy Planning Task Force. And I acknowledge that there are a lot of N's and some other letters there, so it can get a little confusing. These are two separate projects, but they do complement each other. And the GEB working group is really focused on the buildings interface with the grid. Certainly that is a portion of what the Comprehensive Electricity Planning Task Force, a bit under that purview, but that effort is oriented towards aligning the different levels of planning, integrated resource planning, transmission, distribution planning. So certainly it complements and touches upon a lot of the activities under this GEB project, but it is distinct and structurally it's distinct, and also it's bureaucratically a separate function as well. And Danielle, I don't know if you have any additional on that to say.
I'll just clarify, it actually does not include transmission planning in scope, but
okay.
Planning and resource planning, that's correct. Whereas the GEB work, we would say, is much more on the distribution side and focused on the buildings to grid interaction at that level.
Okay. Any other questions? So it's near the top of the hour, so I guess the timing is good. We'll give you back 90 seconds. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to my friends and colleagues who are the presenters. Thank you to all of you in the audience. I do invite inquiries and questions. Please do not hesitate to contact me or contact Stephen or contact Danielle as well at NARUC. Thank you again. Have a good rest of the afternoon and have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye.